Hi, I'm John Delano, political editor at KDKA-TV, and our special guest is Conor Lamb, the congressman from the 17th Congressional District. Congressman, thank you so much for being with me today. Much appreciated.
Hi, John.
So let me ask you, you are a strong and early supporter of Vice President Biden as President of the United States. Why?
I think he understands what it's going to really take to build back the middle class and build back the industrial base, the jobs base, the quality of life that we enjoyed in Western Pennsylvania for so much of the 20th century. But, I think it's been under threat from jobs moving overseas and the economy changing, and now, of course, from the pandemic. And I also think he's a leader that really prioritizes the idea of bringing people together and trying to tone down some of the rhetoric and some of the fighting. And he has spent a lot of his career working across the aisle and doing that. He's a person of good character. And so I think he has a lot to offer.
As you know, your opponent is a strong supporter of President Trump. In this race in the 17th District, if you are a Biden supporter, should you vote exclusively for Conor Lamb? Or if you are a Trump supporter, should you vote exclusively for Sean Parnell?
No, absolutely not. And I think, from the moment I started running, I tried to be clear with people that I was really just running to be a representative for them, a representative of Western Pennsylvania, and would never hide the fact that I'm a Democrat. I believe we should put a thumb on the scale for working people and try to give them a fair shot at what they're working for, especially these days when so many people don't get paid enough and the costs for so many things, whether it's school or healthcare or all these other costs, are just going up and up. But Congress is a different branch of government. It just really is different from the president. We have different jobs. Our job is to do oversight. Our job is to fight for, businesses and workers in our communities. And so I think the right attitude of a representative, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, is to say, I'll work with anybody who happens to be in the White House or in the Senate or wherever to get something good for my constituents. And that's what I've tried to do under an administration that's of a different party of mine. That's what I'll continue to do if he continues in the White House. And, conversely, if Vice President Biden becomes the president, I'll look to work with him. But, I also won't hesitate to say if there are areas where I disagree with him or where we think we need to be a little more transparent about something. And that's what your job is in Congress.
Well, are there areas in which you disagree with Vice President Biden?
I think so far we're pretty consistent with each other. I think maybe sometimes we emphasize different things because he is running an entire national campaign. And so sometimes he spends time talking about issues that are not as, maybe not as dominant or applicable to Western Pennsylvania. But, I know you wanted to talk about energy today and energy jobs. And I think that's a good example. He's running to be the president of an entire country where renewable energy is on the rise. Wind power is on the rise. Solar power is on the rise. But a lot of that is in the South, the Midwest, the far West. Here in Western Pennsylvania, natural gas drilling is still very prominent. Nuclear energy is incredibly important, as is the future of carbon capture technology so that we can keep making steel, keep making petrochemicals, all these types of things that we make here. And he's not opposed to any of that. In fact, under the Biden administration, they did a lot in favor of that. But I probably talk about that stuff more than he does.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because you were a member of his committee that was chaired or co-chaired by former Senator John Kerry and your colleague in the Congress, AOC. And, I read that position paper that came out, and I don't recall the words fracking in there. And I'm wondering whether or not you had some influence on the final policy such that it was not anti-fracking or anti-natural gas, which is not exactly, some would say, not a political winner in Western PA.
Well, I think the goal of the document that you're talking about was to try to emphasize the things that are going to be new and that are coming in the future. So it had a heavy emphasis on making new investments, building new things, doing new research, because the future of a lot of these technologies is up for grabs, and countries like China are trying to beat us to the punch on a lot of the clean energy stuff. But I really emphasized with the committee the fact that I thought our workers here, especially pipe fitters, and others, Boilermakers, could play a big role in helping us improve the existing natural gas infrastructure, because it leaks a lot. It leaks a lot of methane, which is actually even a worse greenhouse gas than carbon. And so you will see some references in the document to pipe fitters and to mitigating and lessening some of this methane, which is actually good for workers and good for business and good for the environment all at the same time. And so, obviously the document assumes that we have a strong natural gas infrastructure, and that we have to do some more research on things like carbon capture that's also mentioned in there. So I tried to speak up for Western Pennsylvania and our industries and our workers.
Well, as you know, your opponent, Mr. Parnell, really goes after you on energy issues and on fracking and the like. Maybe it's fair, Congressman, just to ask you to restate your views when it comes to natural gas, fracking, and the Shell cracker plant.
Sure. And I think that natural gas has been incredibly good for our economy, for our jobs, and also for our national security. Sometimes people forget about that part, but it has made us energy independent for the most part, and we don't have to rely on countries like Russia and places in the Middle East. The other thing it's done is really save a lot of homeowners money on their energy bills, and obviously it's put a lot of people to work at the drilling sites, on the pipelines, and in the big petrochemical plant in my district in Beaver County. So all those things are very good, and I want to see those benefits continue. Also, because of the switch from coal to gas, we have actually stopped emitting so much carbon as we did before. So it's been pretty successful for the environment too. There are risks, and I want to be honest about those and talk about ways that we can improve. Like I said, the pipes leak a lot right now, and they leak a lot of methane, which is really dangerous. And there have been some health impacts near the drilling sites. Now, I don't believe that means you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that what you mean is you need a cop on the beat. You need people working for the EPA and at other places who are capable of dealing with those things, regulating them, separating the good players from the bad. And there are good players and bad players in this business. So that's, basically where I stand on it. I think that Vice President Biden's stance is very similar. And unfortunately, many of the things that you raised from my opponent, from the Trump campaign, from wherever, they're just not true. And I hope that reporters like you and others start to recognize that, because they're, in my view, very clearly not true. And it doesn't matter how many times they repeat it or how many times Vice President Biden repeats that he won't ban fracking. They're gonna keep saying these untrue things.
Well, you're quite right about the president repeating numbers of times in tweets that you are essentially a Nancy Pelosi puppet and that you voted for her as speaker. That's demonstrably untrue, as I recall. Would you respond to why do you think the president tweets about you so much?
I don't know, but I do think that the existence of someone like me, who actually does try to work with both sides of the aisle, who doesn't spend their whole political career fighting with people, that's not really convenient for him, because he wants people to think that it's all us against them, that he's fighting for this so-called silent majority against these boogeymen that he just sort of dreams up and talks about. And that's just not how it really is. We're not perfect in Washington, D.C., in Congress, or in the Democratic Party, but there's many of us that are trying very hard to just get things done on behalf of our constituents, to be kind and civil with one another no matter what happens. And I think if people really knew that was how most of their elected officials actually are, a lot of the things that Trump argues just wouldn't make any sense. And so I think that's maybe why he attacks us when we behave like that.
So what is your relationship with House Speaker Pelosi?
I respect her. I don't hesitate to tell her when I disagree with her, which happened actually recently when she passed a big bill called the HEROES Act that most Democrats voted for. I voted against it, and I told her some of my reasons for that. And it's a relationship like you would have in any workplace that there is. And so the way they characterize it is not really true, but it's true. I didn't vote for her. I think it's time we need a new generation of people to come into leadership in the House and Senate. The same people have been there for so long, and you just worry at times that they've spent so much time kind of battling with each other over the years that in moments of crisis like this, it makes it hard for them to strike the deals that need to be struck.
I assume if you're reelected, you will not vote again for her for speaker?
That's correct.
And then finally, let me just ask you, I guess, two questions. I want to ask you about Sean Parnell. What is the biggest reason that folks should not vote for him? I mean, what are your greatest concerns about him as a candidate for Congress?
You know, I'm not trying to avoid your question, John, but when I spent a lot of time campaigning in the last couple of years, it was amazing how many people would tell me, often on their doorstep when I knocked on their door, that they don't like the negative campaigning, and they were asking me not to talk about my opponents and say, just tell us what you're for. We'll figure it out. So I try to stick with that. You know, I'm someone, again, who's a Democrat, but really cares about getting things done, and you have to work with the other side to do that. I want to fix this economy. I want to raise the minimum wage. I want more people to be able to join a union and get a middle-class job. And I don't want people to have to pay so much for school and for healthcare and so many other things. I try to always focus on what's happening here in Western Pennsylvania. I get the sense with him sometimes that he's very focused on the president and his national campaign ideas. And, you know, people will just have to decide which thing they prefer, I guess.
Well, that's fair enough, but I wanted to give you the opportunity because you know I'm going to ask him to comment on you, and we'll see what he has to say on that. Finally, let me just ask you about the campaign itself. It's got to be kind of tough to campaign in a pandemic. How do you do it?
It is. You know, we're trying to be creative. We're trying to reach people, and we're thankful that reporters like you will give us a chance to be on the air and reach people that way. I've been calling a lot of constituents on the phone, writing to them, doing everything I can. And I've gotten out to a lot of food bank distributions and places where I could sort of safely see people and talk to them and hear about what they're going through. So it's a mix of things. And I just think we all have to try to be creative and strike that balance between being safe and still trying to help out as much as we can. That's what we're trying to do.
Are you being safe? Your opponent has posted, and a number of your opponents keep posting a photo of you without a mask, standing right next to people with masks. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that was probably a mistake on my part. I had a mask on, but I think we were outside and I pulled it down to breathe or something when we took the photo. So yeah, I've been wearing a mask mostly, but like I said, I'm not perfect, and neither are most of us. And so everybody kind of makes a mistake every now and then, and we have to do what we can to get a little better and just wear those masks all the time.
Yeah, your advice is that we wear them anytime we're outside?
Well, I'd say my advice is consistent with what the governor recommended, which is actually, I believe that it's if you're outside and close to people within 6 feet. So, you know, myself, for example, I go for a run almost every morning where I'm completely by myself. I usually don't wear a mask during that because they said for exercise, if you're off in distance, that's okay. But you know, when I walk through the main street of our little town here, and I know I'm going to be brushing past people, I always try to wear it.
And then let me ask you about the money in this campaign. This is going to be a multi-million-dollar campaign. The reports that just came out suggested that Sean Parnell raised over $700,000 in contrast to your $440,000, but you still have $500,000 more in the bank. You know, people look at this and they see all this money in this campaign. Well, first, let me ask you, why do you think he raised so much and you didn't raise as much during this last quarter?
Well, I can only speak for myself, and I didn't engage in any active fundraising in March, April, or May, meaning I didn't make any phone calls or do any of the things that we normally do. Because of the pandemic, I just felt that, you know, if people had extra money, they should try to give it to the food bank or to some of the charitable organizations that were helping people with the initial response. And so most of what you saw that I raised was in the month of June. It wasn't for the whole quarter. Look, you know, we appeal to different audiences, and we've both been pretty successful at raising money in this campaign. I wish we didn't have to raise so much. You know, I think there's too much money in politics, and that's been something from the first moment of my career that I've wanted to change. And so I try to focus on small dollar donations and try to get at least some of the corporate influence out of it. But at the end of the day, we're both going to have enough money to run the campaigns we want to run, and people are going to hear more than enough from us by Election Day in November. I have no doubts about that.
Final question, Congressman Lamb. What do you like most? about being a United States Congressman?
I really like those moments when, and they are unfortunately rare, when you realize that you played a role in getting something done, like not just talked about, not just sort of written down in a bill, but actually done, and you get to see it in the life of a person that you represent. And for me, the $600 extra unemployment insurance combined with the stimulus checks, combined with the paid leave that we all did in the CARES Act back in March. I've met so many people, working class, warm-hearted people with kids who just are trying to do important work and make ends meet. And it has totally changed their lives for the last few months. They were able to stay home with their kids when their kids couldn't be in school. They were able to save up a little money against the rainy days that we all know are coming. It lowered their stress. It allowed them to put food on the table. And that was something that, not only I worked on and voted for, Mitch McConnell and Bernie Sanders both voted for the same bill. I mean, how often does that happen, John? That was a special moment. And I think getting to see it play out and make this thing not as bad as it would have been otherwise. It's still not great. There's still a lot for us to do. But that was a good moment to be part of. And I hope we can recapture that here and pass another bill like that in the next couple of weeks.
Well, Congressman Conor Lamb, thank you, sir, very much for spending time with me. We really appreciate it today and look forward to seeing you out on the campaign trail when we can all be out.
Thank you.
Thank you again.